he was in there with Trump not just for financial gain. He was playing it, let's be honest, for power. This is a guy who wants power. It's a story of someone who's got the money, who's got a lot of influence, who's got a lot of ego. Donald Trump has all of those things, but the difference is, at the end of the day, Donald Trump has the Oval Office. Elon Musk doesn't. Musk play here is not to get the White House. Musk play here is to have influence through Congress and possibly through state legislatures.
Professor Scott Lucas, it has been another turn in the torrid affair between Elon Musk and Donald Trump. Elon is going to set up his own party, he says, because he's very upset about the big, beautiful bill. Can you tell me why he is so aggrieved?
Yeah, like all torrid affairs, that initial phase of love that we had at the start of 2025 when these two guys were walking hand in hand or chainsaw and chainsaw to tear up the US government has now turned into bitterness and retribution. Um, it had been building up for weeks. Musk left the Trump administration despite one of those farewells in the Oval Office where Trump's giving him a golden key and Elon's sporting a black eye, uh, with various theories as to how he got it. Despite all of that, Musk was already criticizing uh, this big, not so beautiful bill that was at that point going through its first phases through the House, the lower chamber of Congress. And I think it's important to get to the root of why Musk was objecting to it, because it's not just personality here. Musk had and continues to have two central objections to the legislation, which of course has now been adopted and signed by Trump. And I think those need to be treated seriously because it's not just ego, although this is a battle of two narcissists. Musk is in line with some of the fire breathers in the Republican Party, although almost all of them caved last week in the end. But for weeks, they had been holding out against the bill by saying it jacks up the US debt. Um, the Congressional Budget Office estimates 3.3 trillion, that's with a T, dollars over the next decade. That's on top of the 36 trillion debt that's already there. Some estimates run it up to 5 trillion. And the questions are there is that level of debt sustainable? Um, the second objection that Musk has is that it cuts subsidies and support for renewable energy. Now, Musk does have an interest in that because, of course, you talk about the batteries that are used for his electric vehicles, just as he had an interest in tariffs not being jacked up on China, because that's where some of the components come from. But beyond that, Musk's argument is that the US is falling behind China in renewable energy, whether you talk about solar, whether you talk about wind, whether you talk about various sources for batteries. And like others, including some of the Trump administration, Musk sees the big competition being between China and the United States in the 21st century. So he's had those objections. And up until last week, he was thinking maybe the big, not so beautiful bill is going to be blocked because there were several senators that shared those objections, as well as some moderates who didn't like the deep cuts in healthcare and other programs. But the Senate passed the bill on a 50-50 vote. JD Vance cast the tiebreaker. Then it narrowly passed the House by 4 votes. And Elon's like, what am I going to do next? And that's when the proclamation comes out, which is the America Party. Um, Musk is saying, all right, we will fight 2 to 3 Senate seats and 8 to 10 House seats in 2026. So now you get my people who will block further Trump legislation if he tries to ram something through. But it's one thing to tweet that you're founding a political party, and it's a very different thing to actually organize a political party, which is the big question mark we have right now as you and I speak.
Anne Applebaum writes about this much better than I'll ever be able to convey it. But there seems to be almost an element of, you could possibly call it insider trading with Elon. I mean, has it been very expensive with him? First, the initial breakup with Donald Trump, because I suppose you could make the argument that perhaps he had a little bit of sway over what subsidies he was receiving. And he would, he was privy to a lot of information that, say, a civilian businessman wouldn't be. This breakup and then subsequently the big beautiful bill, has it been costly for him as a businessman?
I mean, there's an immediate cost in that Tesla stock was projected to go down at the start of Wall Street today by up to 7%. So it was down in pre-trading by around about 6.7%. And that's a hit, if I remember correctly, of around about $100 billion off its market valuation. It takes it below a billion. Now, Tesla may recover some of that, and Musk certainly can absorb that shock. But I think there is a question mark, a wider question mark, as he says he'll pursue this political party, um, as to whether he can keep his eye on the ball in his business interest. And that's why you're getting some market jitters around Tesla. What you're saying in the wider context here is well, did Elon get into this game in the first place when he was buddy buddy with Trump to make a big deal of money out of it? And it actually cuts both ways. It's really interesting. One is that in terms of SpaceX, yeah, SpaceX, because it is so ingrained not only in NASA, the space program, but it's ingrained in the Defense Department, the Pentagon. Uh, it stands to benefit from billions from contracts that could be handed out. Musk also could potentially benefit from all that information, let's be honest here, that was stolen from the US government when he and his boys at Doggy or Doge or Doge, however you pronounce that so-called department, were running around and raiding all these computer files. Um, you know, so there's a lot of speculation, how could that information be mobilized? But then on the other hand, look, Trump was on the record um, as opposing continuing the subsidies from electric vehicles. That Musk knew that when he went into the game of Doge and all of that. So he was in there with Trump, not just for financial gain. He was playing it, let's be honest, for power. This is a guy who wants power. He wanted the power not just of his businesses, he wanted power across social media. So having bungled uh, that effort to buy Twitter, because he didn't really want to buy it, but once he had it, he's turned that into media power. And then he really wants that power of being this political player. And at some point, that meant he and Trump could wind up clashing because long before he and Trump were going after each other, Musk was going after it with Trump's inner circle. So he had an online fight with Peter Navarro, who's one of the key advisors to Trump. He's one of the fire breathers that wants to jack up tariffs, as high as you can, because he's an economic isolationist. And then Musk got into it with Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, who's one of the few adults in the room in the Trump administration. And Bessent did not like the fact that Musk was going around not only lifting information, not only trying to fire people, but he was intervening on policy questions, especially on China, which takes us back to that story of who gave Elon Musk that black eye before he showed up for his golden key in the White House. Uh, what we do know is that he and Scott Bessent had a stand-up fight. There was a shouting match while the Italian Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, was in the next room with Trump, and people had to come out and tell him to knock it off. Um, so, yeah, Musk, I think in a sense, it's a story of someone who's got the money, who's got a lot of influence, who's got a lot of ego. Donald Trump has all of those things, but the difference is, at the end of the day, Donald Trump has the Oval Office, Elon Musk doesn't, which is why he's going to take the gamble of forming this political party, or at least says he's going to take that gamble, because if it's a poker analogy, he's not ready to fold his hand yet.
But he also doesn't have the citizenship, right? So I mean, in layman's terms, oh, actually, let's talk more about voters and their appetite. Musk is a South African man. Do you think there is appetite amongst the more, say, nationalistic Trump voters, the MAGA voters, to fall in line behind someone like Elon Musk when he's not actually an American citizen?
Okay, well, let's preface this by saying that Musk cannot become president in 2028 or any point because wasn't born in the United States, um, and he doesn't have an American parent. So that rules him out. But Musk's play here is not to get the White House. Musk's play here is to have influence through Congress and possibly through state legislatures, which, to be honest with you, is the way that Donald Trump uh, completed his takeover of the Republican Party. Yeah, I mean, Trump becomes president, but if Trump doesn't expand that power throughout the government, he can't get away with what we saw last week. What he has to do, and he spent years doing it, or rather, people around him spent years doing it, is backing their loyalists to get into Congress by standing them against Republican incumbents. It was a fight within the Republican Party, not against the Democrats. And they succeeded by and large. I mean, when you look at people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, um, who I wouldn't trust at a dinner party, and I wouldn't trust babysitting my kids, and she gets into office, or Lauren Boebert from Colorado, the gun-toting person with the cafe where everyone has guns in Colorado, and who, by the way, got thrown out of a cinema. Look this one up for some very interesting actions, right? Enough scandal. What we're saying is we've got people here who are not establishment Republicans. They got in by currying favor and by maneuvering alongside Trump, and most of Trump's cabinet is that way. Pete Hegseth, the reality TV star, is the defense secretary. Kirsty Noem, the woman who could have been vice president until she went too far by bragging about shooting her dog in her ghostwritten memoir, and is now the Homeland Security Secretary, where she can pack a gun while she goes to detention centers. That's how Trump succeeded. And that's how Musk is talking about doing it, not by directly getting to the White House. Now, can he do that beyond the organization question? There is a there's a reputation issue that I think Musk has got to deal with. He is safe in the world of Twitter. I refuse to call it X, just my choice, free speech, all that. He's safe in that world because he can stage his polls, and 65% will say, go form a new party. And he's like, yay, because that's an echo chamber. If you look at the wider polling, and here I would recommend Nate Silver, if you have to go by polls, I don't think they're the be all and end all, but if you have to go by polls, Silver tracks the polls for Musk, and he polls worse than Trump does right now. Trump's approval rating around about 45% right now. Musk is hanging on around 40%. So, I think he's got a double problem here. He's got a double problem that a lot of Trump loyalists are going to think that he has been disloyal. But beyond that, Musk appealed to independent voters. And independent voters are where the action is in the states, despite all of the talk of Trump's base. Musk does not appeal to a lot of independent voters because I think in large part because of the personality. Um, it's really interesting. You can be Donald Trump and get away with it for reasons I can get into with Donald Trump, right? You can't get away with it if you're Elon Musk the way he tries to play it. He cannot out Trump Trump in terms of being the celebrity politician.
On that personality, I just wanted to ask you finally. We have a visit this week from President Macron, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats. He is set to push on Keir Starmer, or to request that Keir Starmer stands firm with Macron against Donald Trump, who is expected to raise tariffs, our steel tariffs, on the 9th of July. We're looking possibly going up to 50% on those tariffs. Do you think that there is any veracity in the request to stand firm against Trump? Is there any point in doing so? Because, right now we're talking about Elon Musk, who did, or arguably did, stand up to Trump, and look where it's got him. Do you think that someone like Keir Starmer or Macron could curry favour by standing firm against him?
Look, you can stand firm against Trump and come out of it, even in Trump 2.0, when, let's be honest, the people around Trump, who are quite vicious, have been much more organized in their threats. You can look at the leader of Mexico, who stood up to Trump and said, look, we're not going to accept you just imposing the tariffs on it. We're not going to accept you just militarizing the border and telling us to accept that. And she pushes back, right? Claudia Sheinbaum. She pushes back, and Trump blinks. Mark Carney, former head of the Bank of England, now Prime Minister of Canada, this huge rallying of Canadian national sentiment because Trump tried to make it the 51st state. And the Canadians have stood up not only to that, but they've stood up to the tariffs, and are doing quite well. The EU, to an extent, is, and we're right in the middle. We're at an interesting point in those EU negotiations with the Trump administration with that July 9th deadline, which looks like it's been pushed back, by the way, by Trump to August the 1st. But that negotiation over tariffs. But yeah, the whole point of as Trump pushes back that deadline of tariffs is you don't have to simply take the knee before him. But I'll give you a wider point here, and you can tag this for me because I'd like to sneak back in for another podcast. And that is the reason why Keir Starmer can't play tough here is because the UK is screwed. And I need to explain that because I'm going to get every Brexiteer coming in to give you some love now. And that is the fundamental, which ties in a lot of things over the past week. Labor's travails over the welfare cuts, the discussion as to whether it is going to have to raise taxes, reform, uh, you know, the Gang of Five, which is now the Gang of Four in Parliament, but going around making noise that somehow they could make it all better. When the UK cut itself off from the European Union, it blew a 40 billion pound hole in government revenues. I'm going to cover myself by saying I'm not saying that Jeremy Hunt, who was conservative chancellor, said that after the fall of the Truss government, when everyone had to pick up the pieces um, at the start of 22, right? 2022. So you got a 40 billion pound hole that's there. What are you going to do to make up for those revenues? Now, that's why we're having a discussion about do you cut programs, do you raise taxes, et cetera. The fundamental here is that the UK could fill that 40 billion pound hole by getting back into the single market, or at least a large part of it, because then you have a trading partnership. Not even rejoin the EU, you get into the single market. But Labour ruled out that option at the very start after they had a landslide victory. Now, if you're not going to do that, what are you going to do? And that takes us back to the US, which is at least they're not playing full Boris Johnson fantasy politics with the holy grail of the great US UK trade deal that, across all sectors. But what they have done is they have proclaimed a trade deal that isn't a trade deal. It's a memorandum of understanding at the start of 2025 to try to cushion against Trump's tariffs, especially on two key UK sectors, aerospace industry, cars. If Starmer plays tough with Trump, and if the US doesn't give the UK the break on tariffs on cars, and remember, 25% tariff on everyone else on their cars right now, and Trump could raise that and has threatened to raise it. If Trump doesn't give the UK a break on cars, it's a serious dent in UK exports to the US. Not because the UK pays the tariffs, I hasten to add, because US customers pay the tariffs, US importers pay the tariffs, but your sales to the US are likely to drop. And so where's your play here? So that's one reason why Starmer isn't going to go in and play tough with Trump. The other reason, and this is where Macron's being a bit, not a, I wouldn't say he's playing fast and loose here. Who would say that about Emmanuel? But remember, the other key issue here is the support for Ukraine. And Starmer's positioned himself alongside Macron that they're going to maintain support for Ukraine against the Russian invasion, as they should do. But they keep trying to pull the US in amidst the chaos of Trump to provide support as well. And what was Starmer's play on that? It was not to go in and talk tough to Trump. It was to go in and wave the magic envelope. Trump loves magic envelopes. The magic envelope in front of Trump, which had the invitation from King Charles for the state visit. So, posturing by Macron, Starmer cannot afford to take the same line that other politicians have done so because the UK has put itself in economic hawk. And at this point, if you don't have the cards to play, well, you can't talk tough at the table.